Good morning, Coastal students. This is your fellow student, Joshua Terrio, aka The Riot, and this is Trucking With Me. So first, I'm going to ask you to like and subscribe to this video if you find this useful. This video is going to be a three-part series of the pre-trip inspection. I just completed my evaluation and I scored an 89 out of 90. I did say the one part that I got missing, but perhaps he didn't hear me. So in my head, I scored a 90 out of 90, and I know that the pressure may be on, so I'm going to show you how I scored a 90 on, well, an 89 on my pre-trip inspection, and perhaps you can use my same method. So this is going to be part one, and I'm only going to do the outside of the tractor and the engine compartment, and on other videos I'll do the trailer itself and as well as the in-cab inspection. So here we go. First, we're going to start with the running lights. They're mounted and secured properly, and they're amber in color, and they're not cracked, bent, or broken. Remember that. And then you go down here and you look under there and you point at it. Use your hand. I look underneath the truck and there's no puddles or leaks, and the tractor is not leaning to the left or to the right. Those are the first two. And then I come and I use my hands and I touch everything so I don't, everything that I can touch so that I don't forget it. So here we have our headlight. It's clear in color, it's properly mounted and secured, it's not bent, broken, or damaged, and there's no missing hardware. Right here, we have our turning signal. Properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked, bent, or broken, and it's amber in color. Right to the side of it, we have our reflector. Properly mounted and secure, it's not cracked, bent, or broken, and it's amber in color. So from here, I'll slide my hand up because it's right here. We have the mirror, our hood mirror. It's properly mounted and secure. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Clear of obstructions, and there's no illegal stickers. So then I take my hand, and me personally, I slide back to this clearance light so that I don't forget it on the other side. We have our side marker. Our side marker light is properly mounted and secured. There's no missing hardware. It's not cracked, bent, or broken, and it's amber in color. And from there, I'll go to open up the hood. I already unlatched them, so we don't have to worry about that part. That part, student driver. Open up the hood. And just take your time. The first thing you want to do, you want to come over to the right side of the vehicle. You got your three hoses, and it's always safe to say more than less. Remember that. So we have our three hoses, 1, 2, 3. They're properly mounted and secured. They're not cut or frayed. There's no abrasion, bubbles, or cuts, and these are not leaking, and they're not missing any hardware. And then you'll take your hand and follow it down. If you look through under here, right here, touch it, we have our belt driven alternator, which is properly mounted and secured. There's no missing hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. Next to this, it's connected to our alternator belt. It's properly mounted and secured. There's no missing hardware. It's not cut or frayed. And if I were to tug on it, there'll be no more than 3/4 of an inch of play. Then you slide your hand a little bit back, and there's the alternator wires. They're not cut or frayed. They're properly mounted and secured. no missing hardware. From here, what I like to do, I slide my hand to the turbo. This is the turbo. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. It's not missing any hardware. It has its proper clamps, and it's not leaking any soot. And make sure you say it's not bent, broken, or damaged, as well as the alternator. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. Then what I like to do is I take my hand from the turbo and I slide it back to the exhaust. The exhaust, as you can see, leads to the back of the truck. So you want to follow that. You go on back to the truck, to the back of the truck, and you see you have your exhaust. Our exhaust is properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. This isn't leaking any soot, and it also has its proper clamps. Then you follow your hand up to here. We have the exhaust mount. The exhaust mount itself is properly mounted and secured. It's not missing any hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. Then you'll slide your hand like this. We have our heat shield. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not missing any hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. Then if you look up, it leads to our exhaust stack, which is properly mounted and secured. It is not bent, broken, or damaged. It's not missing any hardware, and it's not leaking any soot. Remember that. Then you take your eyes from up and you'll come on down, follow your hand down. And now we have our fuel tank. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. It's not leaking. And it also has its proper straps that are sitting flush to the fuel tank. The straps are not bent, broken, and damaged. They're properly mounted and secured, and there's no missing hardware, and it has its proper seals. Then we have our fuel cap. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. Not missing any hardware. If I were to open it, it would have the proper rubber gasket, and this is also not leaking. And from there, what I like to do, I come and I hit this side door mirror. This door mirror is properly mounted and secured. It's not missing any hardware. The mirror itself is clear of obstructions, and there's no illegal stickers on here. Then I'll slide my hand down to the door. As you can see, grab the door handle. My door opens and closes correctly. You open it up, and you can see that there's the rubber seals. Go ahead and touch them. We have a rubber seal. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cut or frayed, and it's not bent, broken, or damaged. Then I would go ahead to say, if I had the power on, the windows would go up and down. Then I'll slide down to the door mount itself. The door mount is properly secured. There's no missing hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. And I'll tug on the door. It also supports the weight of the door. From there, I'll go ahead and slide my hand on in, and I'll open up the baggage compartment. Then I'll go ahead and close the door. From there, I'll slide my hand down to the stairs. I said the stairs, they're properly mounted and secured. They're not bent, broken, or damaged. They're clear of obstruction, and I'll stand on it, and it properly holds my weight. It supports my weight. Then you'll go on to the baggage compartment, where you see we have our fire extinguisher. It's properly mounted and secured and charged to the correct level. Then I'll slide my hands over here, and as you can see, we have our 3 reflective triangles, which are properly mounted and secured in here, and they're red in color. That's when you go ahead to say, somewhere in the cab I have extra fuses. Then you'll close this up. The right side is complete. Now we'll take a trip on around here, and boom, we have a little bit more to do. So I'll go ahead, take my hand and place it on the air hoses. We have our air hoses, which are properly mounted and secured. They're not leaking, they're not missing any hardware, and they're not cut or frayed. Now there's two things back here that you're gonna have to get. You can't really get to them by hand, but remember, there's the gear driven power steering pump, which is properly mounted and secured, no missing hardware. It's not bent or broken or damaged, and it's not leaking. And also back here we have our gear driven air compressor, which is properly mounted and secured. It's not missing any hardware, it's not cracked or damaged, and it's also not leaking. From there, I'll slide my hand up to the top. We have our coolant reservoir, which is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. It's not leaking. It's not missing any hardware, and it's filled to the proper level, also the proper color. It never hurts to say too much. Now we have our oil dipstick. I like to say it like this. We have our oil dipstick. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cut or frayed. There's no abrasion, bubbles, or cuts on here either. If I were to pull it out, it'll be to the correct fuel level. That also have no metal shavings, and it would be of the correct color. So from here, I'll go down to the power steering fluid reservoir, which is properly mounted and secured. It's not missing any hardware. It's not broke or damaged, and it's not leaking. Connected to those, we have our three hoses. We have 1, 2, and 3 rubber hoses. They're properly mounted and secured, not missing any hardware. They're not cut or frayed, nor are there any abrasion, bubbles, or cuts, and they're not leaking. Remember, on the rubber, there's no abrasion, bubbles, or cuts. So from here, before I go down, I'll go to my belt-driven water pump, which is right here. This is the belt-driven water pump. It's properly mounted and secured. There's no missing hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged, and it also is not leaking. Connected to the belt-driven water pump is the belt. The water pump belt is properly mounted and secured, not missing any hardware. The belt itself is not cut or frayed, and it would also not have more than 3/4 of an inch of play if I were to give it a tug. Now that that's complete, we completed everything needed for the coastal truck driving pre-trip right here in this section. So from here, I like to go down to the steering gearbox. We have our steering gearbox. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not missing any hardware. It's not broken or damaged or bent, and it's also not leaking. Then I like to slide my hand down to the pitman arm, the drag link, and the steering knuckle, which are properly mounted and secured. They're not bent, broken, or damaged. It's not missing any hardware. These are connected by our castle nuts and cotter pins, which are properly mounted and secured, not missing any hardware on those, and they're not bent, broken, or damaged. Now remember to slide your hand underneath, and it also has a rubber bushing, which is properly greased. So that's complete. I will come over to my leaf spring mount, which is this piece right here. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken, or damaged, and it's not missing any hardware. Connected to those are our leaf springs. These are our leaf springs. They're properly mounted and secured. They're not bent, broken, or damaged. No missing hardware, and it's not twisted or shifted. And we have our U-bolts, which is properly mounted and secured. No missing hardware, and it's not bent, broken, or damaged. Then I will go up to our shock absorber. This is our shock absorber. This thing going up and down here is properly mounted, secured, no missing hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged, and it also isn't leaking. Now that we completed everything on there, I'll start to work my way out, touching everything. We have our air brake hoses, properly mounted and secured, not missing any hardware, not bent, broken, or damaged, not cut or frayed, nor are there abrasions, bubbles, and cuts, and they're not leaking. These are connected to our brake chamber, which is properly mounted and secured, not bent, broken, or damaged. They're not leaking, and they have the proper clamps. Behind them, these are the push rod slack adjusters, which is properly mounted and secured. They're not leaking. There's no missing hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. And if I were to tug on these, they'd have no more than 1 inch of play. Now, you can't see, but that leads into the inside of the rim, which is actually our brake drum, which is properly mounted and secured, no missing hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged, and there's no dirt, oil, or grease. Remember that, no dirt, oil, or grease. And then we have our brake lining, which is like a brake pad. There's no dirt, oil, or grease. It's properly mounted and secured. There's no missing hardware, and they're not dangerously worn thin. And you can also say there's no dirt, oil, or grease. But remember, they're not dangerously worn thin. Now that that's done, I'll slide my hands from underneath here up to the top of the rim. They're evenly threaded. These are my tires. They're evenly threaded. If I were to have a tire gauge, there'll be no more than 4/32 of an inch on the tread itself. It's not damaged. There's no cuts, bents, or it's not cut, bent, or broken. That's when you slide your hand to the side. We have there's no abrasion, bubbles, or cuts. It's properly seated to the rim. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. That's when we go to our rim. Our rim is properly mounted and secured. There's no missing hardware. It's properly seated to the wheel. There's our castle nuts, our lug nuts are properly bound and secured. There's no missing hardware. There's no silver streaks or linings or rust on these lug nuts. Then I'll go to the valve stem. Our valve stem is properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken, or damaged, and it has the proper cap on it. And if I were to have an air pressure tire gauge, I'd be able to check that it's at the correct level. So after that, you go down to the hub seal. Hub seal is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. It's not leaking. It has no missing hardware. And if I were to have a sight glass, you'll be able to see that it's to the correct levels. So that's everything on the front end of the vehicle and the front tire. Now we don't have to get the side marker. We got it on that side, so we don't forget. We got all this on the other side. So now we go over to our glad hands, where you'll grab both of them, both sides. On both of them, we have our glad hands and glad hand connectors. They're properly mounted and secured. No missing hardware. They're not bent, broken, or damaged. On the inside, they have the proper rubber seal. The air hoses themselves are properly mounted and secured. They're not cut or frayed. There's no abrasion, bubbles, or cuts, and they're not leaking. And that goes for both air hoses and for a tractor and trailer. And then remember, we also have our electric line. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. It's not cut or frayed, and there's no abrasion, bubbles, or cuts on these. Properly mounted and secured, everything. Make sure you touch it so you can always remember whatever you can reach. From here I go in, we have our frame and our cross member. Our frame and our cross member. Properly mounted and secured. not bent, broken, or damaged. There's no missing hardware, and I'll go ahead and say there's no illegal welds on these either. From here, I'll go down. We have our drive shaft, our drive axle and U-joint. Our drive axle and our U-joints are properly mounted, secured, not bent, broken, or damaged, and they're also not twisted, not missing any hardware. Then I'll go ahead and get this. I'll come back and get this as I'm working my way in there. We have our catwalk. It's properly mounted, secured. It's clear of obstructions, no missing hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged, and it can also support my weight. And that's the same for the steps. Properly mounted, secured, not missing any hardware, clear of obstruction, and not bent, broken, or damaged, and can support my weight. You know what I'm saying? The thing can hold us up. It will hold us up. Now I'll go back here. Remember, we have our torque arm, properly mounted, secured, not bent, broke, or damaged, and there's no missing hardware. And from here, you can get this now or you can wait. I'll go ahead and get it now. We have our fifth wheel air hose, properly mounted, secured, it's not cut or frayed, there's no abrasion, bubbles, or cuts, and it's not leaking. And that goes the same for our air brake hoses. They're properly mounted, secured, no abrasion, bubbles, or cuts, no missing hardware, they're not cut or frayed, and they're also not leaking. And that leads us to our brake chambers, as you can see here. They're properly mounted, secured, there's not bent, broken, or damaged, there's no missing hardware on these, and they're also not leaking. Behind it we have the push rod slack adjusters. You have to get them for each axle. They're not leaking, they're properly mounted and secured. There's no missing hardware, and if I tug on it, there'll be no more than 1 inch of play. Now that those are done, I would come out and I'll start working my way into the wheel system by first doing the leaf spring mount, which is here, properly mounted, secured, no missing hardware, it's not bent, broken, or damaged. The leaf springs, properly mounted, secured, no missing hardware, not bent, broke, or damaged, nor twisted or shifted. And we have our U-bolts here again, properly mounted, secured, no missing hardware, not bent, broken, or damaged. And you want to remember this shock absorber right here. And we have our shock absorber in the back. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. It's properly mounted, secured, and also it's not leaking. No missing hardware. So once we cover everything that we can see here, that's when we'll go back into the brake drum, properly mounted and secured, no missing hardware, there's no dirt, oil, or grease, and it's not cracked, bent, or broken. And we have our brake lining, properly mounted, secured, no missing hardware, there's no dirt, oil, or grease, and it's not dangerously worn thin. Once again, lining is not worn thin. Now we'll come up to our tires. Now these tires are different. There's bud spacing. So we have the correct bud spacing and it's free of obstruction. The tires aren't touching, but the inner and outer rim are. So the tire itself is evenly treaded. And if I were to have a tire gauge, there'll be no more than 2 32nds of an inch on these tread. Slide your hand down, we have the wheel itself, properly mounted, secured to the rim. There's no abrasion, bubbles, or cuts. We have the inner and outer rim, properly mounted to the wheel. There's no crack bent or is not crack bent or broken. There's no illegal welds. We have our valve stem, properly mounted, secured, not crack bent or broken. It's not leaking. It has the proper cap. And if I were to have air pressure tire gauge, it'll be filled to the correct level. We have our lug nuts, properly mounted, secured, no missing hardware. There's no leaks, or there's no silver lining or streaks, and there's no rust. We have our hub seal, which is properly mounted and secured, no missing hardware, and it's not leaking. And if I were to have a sight glass, I'll be able to see into there to see that it's the correct level. Now here, from here, I mean, You could get the trailer. You can start on the trailer since it's here, but this is just gonna be part one. And you come back here, since you got all the air system, you got the tire. Remember your airbag mount, which is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. There's no missing hardware. And underneath they have the bell housing, which is also not cracked, bent, or broken, and not missing any hardware, and mounted correctly. And then we have our airbag itself. It's properly mounted, secured. It's no missing hardware. There's no abrasion, bubbles, or cuts, and it's not leaking. From here, we'll look up. Since we already got our leaf springs, mounts, and everything on this one, we don't have to get it on this one. So here we have our fifth wheel platform and our fifth wheel slide, properly mounted and secured. There's no illegal welds, no missing hardware, and it's not bent, broken, or damaged. We have our fifth wheel release handle and locking pin, properly mounted and secured. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. No missing hardware, and it's in the lock position. Here we have our pivot pin. This one doesn't have a cotter pin, but we have our pivot pin here. It's properly mounted and secured. No missing hardware, and it's not bent, broken, or damaged. This is where you could, and we also have our fifth wheel, properly mounted and secured, not missing any hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. There's no illegal welds, and it's properly greased. And there's the correct space. There's no spacing between the apron and the fifth wheel. The apron, you can go ahead and say that here's the apron. There's no illegal welds, and it's not cracked, bent, or broken. That's really underneath the trailer. So from here, we're almost finished. We'll come back here, come up underneath the truck, and we'll finish it out. So we have our kingpin here. It has a shank and a head on it. It's properly mounted and secured, and it's not bent, broken, or damaged, and no missing hardware. And if you see straight ahead, we have our locking jaws. No missing hardware. It's not bent, broken, or damaged, and it's in the lock position, as you can see. And there's no space between the apron and the fifth wheel. So if you missed the anything up in the front on the first axle right there, you can catch it back here. Like for instance, if I missed the torque arm up there, I can catch the torque arm right here. Remember, you can always go back and catch it before you've completed. So since we're here, we have our turning signals, our four-way flashers, our brake lights, and we have a reverse light. They're properly mounted and secured. They're not bent, broken, or damaged, and they're amber in color. And the reverse light is clear in color. From there, we'll work our way out to the mud flaps. Mud flaps are properly mounted and secured, not bent, broken, or damaged. It's not missing any hardware. We have our DOT reflective tape, which is red and white in color. The mud flap itself is properly secured. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. It's not cracked or frayed. It has the proper spacing between the tire and the mud flap, and it's also not dragging on the ground. In the next video, we'll go and do the trailer, and we'll also have one on the inside. If this video you find helpful, do me a favor, pause it for a second. Maybe don't even pause it, just go down and hit the subscribe button, you know, ring the post notification bell and hit all, so that you can get some of my videos whenever I upload them, and that'll be greatly appreciated. So it's your boy The Ride, and I see if you made it this far, you're trucking with me. Thanks for trucking with me. Hey, good luck on your pre-trip inspections, and you know, just take it step by step. place your hand on it, get you a pair of gloves, and you're gonna be coming out fine. So this is your boy The Riot, truck with it.